Let's get reaction now to what we have already seen unfolding, and certainly the expectations from that looming meeting between Ramaphosa and Trump. We're joined by political economist Biniza. We're also joined by Brand Africa founder Thebe Ikalafeng. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Ikalafeng, I do want to start with you. This is such an incredibly important moment for not just Africa, but certainly for South Africa's narrative. Talk to us a bit about that, right?
Well, I mean, depending on how this meeting with Donald Trump goes with our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, it could set the tone for the rest of the continent. As you say, it's an important moment because it's how we position ourselves in that conversation with him, how we assert ourselves as a sovereign, but also as an equal partner. So not going there with a cap in hand, but going there rather as an equal partner who has something of value to offer. And of course, I think the important thing as well, go in there to build future relationships, to focus on progress rather than on the past.
Yeah, let me just stay with you for a little bit, because you hear Vincent Magwenya, they were speaking to the media, saying that right at the beginning, that their intention is not to spend time on dispelling the narrative of a persecution. Is that the right approach? That's not what we're going to focus on, because there's a public knowledge that it's not true, he says.
Well, the truth of the matter is, I think the Trump administration does know what the truth is. So it is not important to go and grandstand in public, and because otherwise you're going to end up in a Zelensky situation where it's the two parties trying to best each other. I think that matter can be dealt with better privately rather than publicly. I think what is public and important, and remember, the U.S. is Donald Trump certainly is a very transactional leader. So the question is, what is South Africa has to offer, and what does America have to offer? If you look at how his trip to the UAE, to the trip of the Arabs was, it is a very transactional, rich trip, and not a trip of trying to focus on like he personally said himself last week. He said when he was in the Arab countries, I'm not here to come and deal with this country on a moral lens. I'm here to look at the country in terms of the best interests of America. So it's about South Africa putting on the table what's the best interest of South Africa and the best interests of America, and how can we mutually meet each other.
Mr. Biniza, thank you so much for your time as well. I think there's a lot of questions that we hear coming around how the decision was made as well for the president to say, well, this is who will be flanking me. Minister for Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, what you think he'll bring to the table? Park Stau from Trade and Competition. You've got, of course, Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, as well as Ronald Lamola, no surprises there, of DIRCO. But is this the right team for us to get to, which is really, I suppose, the most important thing for South Africa, that trade discussion?
Sure. Look, I do believe that the president has got the strong team with him and the right team, I think, on two accounts. Firstly, I think President Donald Trump will be looking to make a deal. Most of his sort of international tours and diplomatic engagements have been around trying to make a business deal that's in the interest of the U.S. Obviously, it'll always be a transactional thing, as Thabo just mentioned. And so it will come down to what South Africa has to offer and what the U.S. Will gain from this. And I guess we'll be also looking to gain for our own exports. From the perspective of the importance of agriculture exports to the U.S., again, that's important, and hence we've got the agricultural minister. But the second point that I think the delegation will set is a strong message of the collaborative approach that the president has taken in his second term, whether this is from the perspective of the GNU, but also just I think the optics of the delegation that he's got is also going to be clear in dispelling any kind of myths or misinformation around South Africa being, oppressing white South African minorities, which is clearly not true.
Yeah, and we're going to get into the bits and bobs of it, but we did, of course, hear Magwenya just moments ago saying that the details may not necessarily be the core intention of that meeting, right? The details of what we want to get from a trade relationship point of view. But I do want to look at that. But in a moment, let's sit with the team, Mr. Ikalafeng, that he's brought. Biniza saying the optics of it look really good to even dispel the persecution.
And that is for that reason that, pardon me, and it's for that reason that he doesn't have to say much about the misinformation and disinformation, because obviously you can't have a white minister of agriculture and an Afrikaans one and have Afrikaans people saying that they're being oppressed, clearly, unless he himself is selling out his own people. So I think from an optics perspective and from messaging, that says the message on its own. But I think also, as Sia has says, the combination of the teams is purely transactional on the trade side, and from an agricultural perspective, it's the optics of a white person and agriculture, which is the message that we need to dispel without getting into it so much.
Yeah.
I think it's a very strong team actually, and I think the good thing about Cyril, President Cyril Ramaphosa, is his ability to not want to get into a street fight. I mean, if you look at, for example, how he handled the challenge that we had with President Paul Kagame in Rwanda, he never went into the ring. He dealt with that in the right channels, and I think we can be comfortable about one thing. Going into into the White House is also a good thing, because instead of sitting here and waiting and watching the movie take place, by us going to the United States, we're showing a couple of things. One, we're showing that we're an independent sovereign, but also a country that is not afraid of itself and has got nothing to hide. And that is why we're able to go there, because if we had anything to hide, we will not be going to America, because we'll be facing the backlash. So I think, to me, from an optics perspective, to answer your question, we've done the right things, optics of being there, and the optics of who we brought to the team, and the optics of the combination of the composition of the team, not just from a racial, but also in terms of a transactional heavy team, if you will.
Yeah. See, I want to look at, I mean, we keep talking about the optics, and I think they're important, but even our reporter there, Zianda, who is in Washington, saying that that we know that in a conversation with Donald Trump, what happens before the cameras switch on and what happens when the cameras do switch on are two very different sort of tones that you're going to get. And I'm keen to hear what you expect from what happens behind the lights and the camera. And I raise that about what this really says about the real power dynamics that are at play here, right? The narrative that the USA might very well need South Africa as an important trade partner. You've got... the news just 2 days ago that the USA has lost its top credit rating after that downgrade from Moody's. If that means anything, if there are concerns that the US and the Make America Great Again drive is not yielding results for the US, and so they might need to pull back a little bit. Is that the power dynamic that does need to be considered here?
Sure. Look, I do think that is the US is negotiating on a bit of a back foot here, especially if you look at how they've had to walk back a lot of the decisions they'd made on the tariff front without actually China coming to the table to negotiate. The other thing, though, is I think South Africa, by being there, sends a message that will appease Trump's personal character, given that, he wants the countries to come into Washington to negotiate deals for themselves. Sadly, though, this is a breakdown and a continuing breakdown of multilateralism, which is something that South Africa and the whole world, I think, prefers in dealing with these issues. However, I guess, us being there is a chance for us to negotiate strongly. And I think the president's response to a similar difficult questions at the recent CEO summit held in Abidjan is a flavor of how he sees things. And I think he'll definitely be in his A game to deal with some of those awkward questions when the cameras are there, which is also, part of the whole fanfare and the negotiating process.
Yeah.
And we should. And
sure, go ahead.
I was going to say as well, we shouldn't worry about him being there for a couple of other reasons. There are much stronger economies than us. The UK has been there. Italy has been there. So we shouldn't, because I've been listening to a lot of analysts saying, we should be going there. We're showing weakness. There's been bigger economies who are much better cards than we have, who have gone to the US, understanding very well, as Sia has said, in one way you have to play onto the strength of the person, and knowing the charm of our president. And if you look at what Starmer did from the UK, what did he do better than anybody else? He went there and charmed and played to his ego. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump says to him, and he probably should say, I would invite, he should be saying to him, I'd like to invite you as my guest to come and see South Africa for yourself. I think if he can live with that kind of an assurance, that long before the G20s, before we arrive to the G20 discussion, if he can find a way to invite Trump, if not him, certainly a delegation that Trump authorizes to come and see South Africa, I think that'll be actually one of the big wins or takeaway from this trip. Because what Americans need, Americans believe in seeing things and hearing things. So right now they're hearing things, but they have not seen things on the ground. They're just hearing from 49 people or 59 people who've gone there with false or misinformation about the country, and some other people tweeting about the country. I think if we can bring a couple of them here, and I've seen this work very well. I mean, in my work in Ethiopia and many other countries around the continent, I've seen how this has worked when we've brought in delegations from different countries, from those countries like the US and all those, to come and see for themselves on the ground what actually happens. And that enables people to have a bit of an informed view, particularly if the people who are coming have got the president's ear.
Sia, you've got the agricultural minister and as part of this trip, and I want to focus on his role in all of this. Incredibly important, obviously the sector, central really to the trade discussion between the two countries, but also leader of the Democratic Alliance that in March had concluded their working visit to the United States. What is expected from him, particularly in the message that he shares to the Trump administration, if you were in John Steenhuisen's shoes?
Joe, I think they're expecting me, obviously, to speak to the importance of his portfolio, the agricultural exports. I think it's going to be a critical part of the conversation. The other part, I think, is also kind of the constituency represented by that portfolio, being white Afrikaners, who are in the majority, the main people involved in, productive mass-scale farming in South Africa. So I think that also then plays to the optics, and also, given him being the leader of the opposition, speaks to the general politics. So I think this was really a master stroke by the president by including him in that delegation, because he serves all of those optics. I do think, though, that South Africa's interests are much broader than just agriculture, manufacturing being part of those critical exports that we export, but also in the current realm of the global transition away from carbon and the importance of certain critical minerals, which South Africa also does supply. The importance of our mining sector is actually quite critical. So I do think that that's the reason why we've got the trade and industry minister there as well. And I think lastly, Steenhuisen serves, clarifying also and demystifying a lot of the issues that South Africa's approach to dealing with the land reform issues, which again, is a critical part of some of the optics in the misinformation that's been put out there. And I think it'll be important for him to also touch on those issues as well.
Yeah. So let's deal with that. Sure, go ahead.
Just a quick another point on Steenhuisen. I think a fifth point, just to add to see, a fifth point on the importance of having Steenhuisen there is, you already had a delegation from the DA much earlier in the year going there. We don't know what was discussed behind closed doors, but because they come from the DA and Steenhuisen is the leader of the DA, in a way it will help to counter whatever, or we'll have to counter whatever was said, assuming that it wasn't said in the interest of South Africa, because it will be very. I find it impossible to think that he will go there with a different message from the one that was said by his own party, because otherwise he would have agreed to go. So, but things as they are, we know that parties are contentious, and they would be going there to try and put on their own forward message. So I think it's also on the fifth point. It's very good to have Steenhuisen there.
Well, let's take the conversation a step further. We also are joined by Mr. Tiens Ilof, who is with the Africana Leadership Network. Mr. Ilof, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us in this really important discussion. And I think to get us started, your view on the significance of this moment to really telling the story of South Africa to the US after all these, allegations that have been made around the persecution of white Afrikaner farmers in South Africa. What do you make of also how that needs to be tackled in this visit to the US?
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry that I was struggling with the hotel's Wi-Fi. I'm in Cape Town at my home, but
Not a problem.
thank you for having me. I think, look, it may have been said, I may have missed it, but it's a very important meeting. It probably couldn't have happened earlier. I think it was important for some time to lapse. And for the country, it's very important. And obviously, all of us hope that it will have a good outcome. I don't think that the Americans. Let me speak about the American administration and separate them from Mr. Trump himself. Mr. Trump may believe things that he's been told by we don't know who, not by any Afrikaners or organization in this country. The Africana Leadership Network, when we met with the ANC, said that we had never said there's white genocide and we had never said there's large-scale expropriation of white or Afrikaner farms. So he got it somewhere. But I do think one must, this thing of misinformation is bandied about. Now, if I were in the American administration and I had to advise the president, I would ask the embassy in South Africa and probably the CIA, who can read everything that's being said on South African media and South African social media. And so I don't think we must overemphasize this thing of misinformation. There's no way that the Americans depend on X or Y or Z to tell them what's happening. They know what's happening. So it's a question of emphasis. So I think that's, for me, the nuance that we have here. I hope that, and I've heard, I think it's also important, I agree that it's important for the Minister of Agriculture being a DA leader, or DA leader to be there, and also Mr. Patel. The problem, I think, is that America has had these trade restrictions on many countries, and they've resolved some of them in one meeting because it was only the trade issues. Our situation is slightly more complex. Because it involves internal politics, call it the old Afrikaner issue, but more than that. And it also involves the ANC government's long-standing relationship with Hamas, Iran, and others, and obviously the court case of Israel. So I don't think that we should hope or think, we should hope, but think that this can be resolved in one meeting. My hope is that a process could be started of engagement over the next number of weeks at various levels to try to resolve some of these issues to the acceptance and agreement of both sides.
Yeah, there's a lot more to discuss, and we're going to take a short break. Remember, we also are welcoming your perspectives as well. So do send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. Give us a call on 010-594-6010. Just a little bit earlier, we did see President Cyril Ramaphosa arriving at a briefing meeting in Washington, D.C. He's touched down, and preparations will continue for that all-important meeting in the Oval Office on Wednesday with U.S. President Donald Trump. He is accompanied by the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Trade and Industry, Parks Dau. He also is flanked by the Minister in the Presidency, Kumbunzo Chabeni, as well. And it's going to be really an important discussion around just what it is that needs to be done to get the trade relations between the two countries right. Share your thoughts with us. We continue with our panel on the other side of this. Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition with myself, Naledi Moleo. President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially touched down in Washington and is now getting ready to get closer and closer to that all-important meeting with the U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday. And of course, we analyze that with Biniza, political economist, Tebe Igalafeng, Brand Africa founder and also an author, and Cyril, who is with the Africana Leadership Network. We're taking your calls as well to be part of our discussion. Eunice is calling in from Ladysmith. Eunice, good evening.
Good evening, Nadia. How are you? And
I'm
good evening
well,
to your
sir.
viewers.
Thank you so much for calling. Talk to us.
Yes, I have great expectations for our president. Ramaphosa is a person that is cool, will be able to handle any in the situation with Donald Trump. I think he will come out winning with Donald Trump.
Okay, confidence in the president. Straight to the point. Thank you so much for that, Eunice. We really appreciate it. Theo's calling in from Margate. Theo, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, thanks for calling. Talk to us.
So my expectation is I hope Donald Trump is going to ask President Ramaphosa, what is the BEE benefiting the 50 million poor black South Africans? And the only 5 million whites, if the 5 million whites leave South Africa, will it benefit the BEE program?
Okay. The question becomes, is Trump that invested in that very question? But we'll give that one to our panelists. Thanks so much for calling, Theo. We appreciate it. Let's take a look at a few of our WhatsApps as well that have come in from our viewers. There we go. Anonymous says, I have high hope and believe and trust for the South African president and his team to do well. President Ramaphosa is the most knowledgeable person when it comes to the matter in question. He is a president full of convincing abilities. Appreciate that. Thank you, Anonymous. Another one that says, the visit to the USA by President Cyril Ramaphosa proves that we're still far from kissing freedom as Africans. The US president is just a racist and only cares for whites because he believed the propaganda that was spread. We will always be beggars under people like President Ramaphosa. Why does he entertain the US instead of making strong relationships with the BRIC nations? We need a brave president like Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. Okay? Sketo says taking Steenhuisen with the US is a master stroke for Ramaphosa. It will dispel lots of misconceptions. All right. We'll keep some of that coming in. But I think, Tian says, let me just come back to you because you've just joined the discussion. It's an interesting question from Theo, and I think you did touch on the issue a little bit more and say, well, there are our internal issues that we certainly grapple with as a country. You've, as the Leadership Network, also called for a national dialogue. I'm keen to hear where that is, but that's not the discussion right now. But you hear South Africans saying, well, it is. Theo essentially saying that he hopes that Donald Trump will ask Ramaphosa what BEE is really doing for South Africa. I bring that to essentially say this. The division in our country set to be highlighted by the president. So if that does come up, how does the president respond to that? The divisive issues that perhaps you yourself and Thebe Galafeng right now may very well not agree on.
Well, let me say there are, as we know, there are three sets of issues. The one is international relations, the ANC's foreign policy. The second is trade issues, which is, I think, at the heart of this. And thirdly, there's probably what I would call internal politics, which would include BEE and the All Africana issue. I don't know what President Trump knows of any of specifically the last one, but while we're talking about it, I think the problem is that what I hear is that there are no nuances in the White House at the moment. You know, you're either for or against. Whereas I think our situation is a nuanced one. So I would imagine that President Ramaphosa would be and should be nuanced about this. Yes, there's no white genocide, but yes, we have a problem with rural safety. Yes, there's no whole-scale discrimination so that people need to leave. But yes, we have transformation, racial transformation targets, we have BEE, and we feel that must eradicate the sort of sins of the past. Whether President Trump will accept this is obviously the million-dollar question, but I would think that's the best that President Ramaphosa can say. The problem is that those are nuanced views, and I'm not sure that this is nuances is at the moment the run at the White House.
Mr. Galafeng, I want to come to you. A worst-case scenario, yeah.
Well, I don't think Trump really cares about BEE. I don't think he cares about any of those issues. Even I'm not even sure if he cares about the Afrikaners, by the way. I think it was just Tiens, you the one who brought it up before we went on break. That the elephant in the room has got to be our international posture as a South Africa, our historic relationships with the Palestine, if you will. That's perhaps the one elephant in the room. So, and I'm almost thinking that in addition to what I've said, that the one good thing that could come out of here is on our side is Cyril to invite Donald to come to South Africa. But I think the real big takeout out of this from a public perspective, because remember, Trump doesn't like to be seen to be losing. He always likes to be seen to have resolved something bigger. So part of resolving something bigger for him would be to come out of this meeting with somebody Cyril saying, I am going to go to Israel and I'm going to have a conversation with Netanyahu to see how we can work together. And Trump will go out and say, you see, I've brought them together. They've been antagonistic towards Israel all these years, and I've now tried to resolve this. That's the one side. The second one with the Afrikaner side, because that's just the if you will, a quote unquote in marketing, a lost leader, just to get us into a conversation. That one. I don't believe in national dialogues, only because we had one already in 1990 and it got us to here. So too many dialogues will get us nowhere. But in this instance, it may be a low-hanging fruit to say we will go into a dialogue with the Afrikaners and the other marginalized people in South Africa and to try and resolve any other issues and to move forward.
Yeah.
I think that's just posturing more than anything else. But to Donald Trump, there'll be a big outcome compared to just going out there and saying, yes, we can do business, AGOA this, AGOA. AGOA is the least of his work. AGOA is just you admit. I mean, that's how I look at it from my end.
I wanna play a game of what ifs, if you will, Mr. Biniza, and I want to just correct, for the benefit of our viewer. I've been saying that he's a political economist. He is executive director at the political economy of Southern Africa. Thank you so much for that. Okay, Siya Biniza, worst case scenario of what could unfold on Wednesday, if you were to throw the bones and think, well, this is as bad as it can possibly get, not just from what's agreed on and certainly the transactional outcomes of the meeting, but certainly from an optics point of view. And if we were then to see that worst case scenario, again, everyone keeps going back to that catastrophic meeting between Trump and Zelensky. If the president finds himself in a position like that, what does he do?
Yeah, look, it's just it's quite difficult to really gauge how far the bottom can drop, especially in this kind of engagements. Wow, I'm not sure really how the president would have to respond if it got into a spat like that. But I do think that he's got the kind of diplomatic charisma that I think would allow him to stand his ground, but without making it a sort of back and forth argument. I think it's very difficult to see how far or how bad things could get. But worst case for me is South Africa being threatened with sanctions, whether selective or sort of all encompassing, because I think that would have a severe impact on our economy. I think it would be really, really difficult. Again, I think the U.S. presidency really, has had to backtrack on some of its earlier approaches with regards to its diplomacy with Africa, South Africa included. I think even the choice to engage South Africa on some of these political issues that the U.S. and South Africa may not see eye to eye upon is a reflection of the walking back of the previous approach that, I mean, even as far back as President Obama, the US has always had this benign neglect towards Africa. Obviously, things have shifted. The contestation now with the global south is becoming more, difficult for them, as well as the importance of so-called critical minerals in the global transitional or from carbon. And so I don't think that the US presidency is in a position to completely trample on South Africa or to completely, disregard its relations with South Africa and the rest of the continent. And so, despite the decision that the U.S. presidency has made on abandoning the G20 shared partnership, the shared presidency that South Africa, obviously being the presidency that's supposed to hand over to the U.S., was supposed to be a collaborative presidency under the leadership of South Africa. I don't think that, given the importance of the continent in its geopolitical contestation with China and Russia and the global South collectively, but also the importance of Africa in the chronicles minerals discussion as part of the global transition from carbon. And so I think he would be measured, or one certainly hopes so, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. We continue
But
with what
there's-
ifs. Yeah, go ahead. Let me give it to Tiens just for a moment. Tiens, go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
Can I say, if I had to, I mean, it's presumptuous of anyone to give the president advice, but if I had to, and you asked me, I would say, don't say anything in front of the media. Just say, thank you very much. We will discuss this in private. Because you don't want to even give one of the others, the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Deputy President of America, a chance to attack him or so. So I mean, he can speak openly in private in the proper meeting. He should just avert from saying anything in public in front of the media, because that was what they did with Zelensky. Don't let them do it. Don't react. Just smile. I know it might be difficult, but that would be my advice. Get into the room and then speak frankly.
The likelihood that that's going to happen, though, Tebe.
I think Tien's his advice is correct in that space, and I do think that Cyril has got, as Sia says, that political or that diplomatic charisma to be able to do that without looking bad. I think he'll be able to do that. Sia alluded to something else which is also very important, actually. It about the continental approach, because I think one of the challenges that we've had as Africa has been that because we've been approached individually, that we have failed to as Trump would say, we have no cards individually as a country, because we go to America one country by country. If you look at Europe, while Italy has gone down its own, and the UK is no longer part of EU, but while they've gone as one-on-one, but they still have got a collective agenda in terms of how to deal with this. And what we should be doing in Africa is understanding that we are the leader in most of the desired minerals, as C has spoken about. We actually should have had a collective approach and to a collective leverage, rather, that we take into meetings such as this. Because it doesn't help that as a country, you have DRC saying you can have my mines, and then South Africa says you can't touch my mines. Are you with me? So then it's going to be who's going to buckle in, who's going to buckle to pressure. So I think, to me, as over and above South Africa, which is the strongest and perhaps the most sophisticated economy in the continent, despite that leverage that South Africa has, South Africa would be stronger if South Africa went, if South Africa and the rest of the continent got together and said, what is our approach here? And we've all spoken about these multipolar, multilateral approaches and relationships. It means nothing if we all go one-on-one. It means everything if we come in with the strength of a collective. What does Mike Angelo say? I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. That's how Africa is thinking.
We're going to close it off, because this is such an insightful discussion, and there is so much interest in what is coming up for us this week as a country. And there is one thing that we haven't yet touched on. Kosatu so cleverly, if you will, called it the Klein Trek, the 49 that have left the country, and we use inverted commas, are refugees in the US. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, just recently speaking to that issue, saying that they're looking to expand the scope of that refugee program, saying that there may be more coming soon. How was that addressed this week. We'll take calls as well on the other side of this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Of course, we are continuing to get expectations from that working visit to the United States by President Cyril Ramaphosa, who has now touched down in Washington, D.C., and will be getting briefed by officials on what the program will look like as we get closer to that meeting on Wednesday with President Donald Trump. Taking your calls on 010594610 and your WhatsApps on 072-110-5584. William is in Johannesburg. William, good evening.
Good evening, lady.
Thank you for calling. Talk to us.
Yes. No, my view is that, look, I think there is the biggest irritation that is coming from South Africa to the U.S. In relation to some of the other things that the country, South Africa, has been able to speak out about the injustices, especially leveled against Israel, which is one of the closest allies of of the U.S. And I think that's number one. But number two is that I think the U.S. has been watching us, especially the Donald Trump's administration, around how do we, navigate the geopolitics. I'm sure the issues of BRICS is some of the issues that irritates the U.S. more around it being able to they capture the global markets and us being able to form relations with the likes of China and Russia. That makes the U.S. more uncomfortable in relations to its own trade markets and also trying to assert itself as the superpower. I think there is much more on what the U.S. is looking at, especially the Donald Trump administration. So I think this current situation around the refugees, South Africa being labeled as a country that is actually targeting this kind of specific groupings in the country, is just one of those attempts to say, please watch your steps, because you are also tampering in our spaces, and therefore even our trade relations. If you tamper in our spaces, then it means that you are actually saying you don't need us in that space.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your input, William. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I want to move towards just wrapping things up with our viewers, but with our panels. But quickly, just two more WhatsApps. Barnes is in Pretoria, having sent in a WhatsApp that says, good evening, President Ramaphosa must talk seriously with Trump for sanctioning South Africa, the NGOs. And I thank him for not having pride just to go there when invitation came. I fully support you, President, on any move you are taking. The struggle continues. Tumamina, he says, Barnes in Bizana. And Katlego Ramshala says topics expected to be discussed include the Land Reform or Expropriation Act, refugee status, and the suspension of US aid. Katlego, we appreciate that. Given Mkajwa says a master move from the president. We wish and expect what's best for South Africa from that meeting on Wednesday. We are almost at the end of this discussion, so I want to get closing thoughts and anything that you want to leave us with. Really, you're more than welcome to deal with. Tiens, I'll let you go first. But I do want us to also deal with the 49, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, saying there might be more to come. Well, how do we tackle that? Do we say thank you for hosting us?
Well, let me say from the side of the Afrikaner Leadership Network, we've never asked for Trump or any other country to accept Afrikaner refugees. We want our members and our fellow countrymen to stay here and build the country for and with others. How that happened is a mystery that we still have to sort out. I think the 49 shouldn't take us away from the bigger issue. The 49 is just a symptom that there is something amiss in the country, and why people who should be happy and according to the ANC they've got privileged lives, why they would choose to go away is the question, and I think that's one that we must all accept. To call them cowards and so on doesn't really help. I don't know any of them, and I can't speak on whether they had a good reason to go or not. They'll have to speak for themselves. But let me say that the problem is a more complex one, and I spoke about the three separate themes of issues. My information is that the Afrikaner issue is indeed high in Washington. Whether Trump cares about Afrikaners or not, he's using it. And it's not because of any misinformation that at least members of the Afrikaner Leadership Network had spread. It's because what he's heard and probably what he's heard from the embassy. The one problem that we have heard from the embassy people here in Pretoria is that in the last 3, 4, 5 years, they've had no contact with the government. They tried to make appointments. When they got them, the officials, the ministers didn't pitch. So there's a long-standing problem with US-South African relations because of our propensity not to see the US as an ally in the past. So that is a bigger problem. And so I think that together with the Afrikaner question is something that that will have to be resolved before we have close to normal relationships.
Yeah. See, I'll let you have your last thoughts, perhaps 2 or 3 points or boxes that you feel must be ticked on Wednesday.
Sure. Firstly, for me, that I hope the president is able to carve out a deal that's good for South Africa. A lot, I think, is in the balance currently as the US tries to renegotiate a lot of the global agreements that affect it. And I hope that in the absence of something that will be good for the continent and the region, such as the renewal of AGOA and others, and I think the re-engagement of the US in the multilateral platforms, I hope the president is able to at least get us a good deal for the country. I think also to resolve some of the diplomatic issues, I think it's quite outrageous and unheard of for, our former ambassador to be called out and to be labeled persona non grata. And I think it's quite sad. But I do think that we can repair those relations. And I think in the absence of this, if the US, continues its belligerent approach in these negotiations and tries to trample all over the South African delegation or over all our national interests, I think this will also highlight the negative side of its own mishaps, which it's had to walk back, such as the mishap with the tariffs. It seems as though in its realignment and renegotiation, it's cutting its nose to spite its face, and it's quite sad to see the US in this position. However, I think if then South Africa, in the worst case, ends up having to have terrible or cut ties with the US, I think this will be quite sad and it will be a terrible loss. However, it'll also be a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, in the continuing rise of the global South, and something that will keep pushing South Africa. Although we want to play a non-aligned approach in our global politics and our diplomacy, I think that will really push South Africa more into the camp of BRICS and more into the global South, where obviously we have our prestigious position. And so I think either way, hopefully we get a better bilateral relation. But I think in the worst case scenario, it's not really going to have, it might have short-term impact that affects us.
Yeah.
But I think in the long term, with the rise of global South, it may be a good thing for South Africa to choose a side between the West and the global South.
Okay. Mr. Ikalafeng, your final thoughts, boxes that must be ticked on Wednesday.
Well, I think the first thing I wanted to speak about, the quick little elephant in the room. I think the 49 people who are in America, we shouldn't worry so much about them because we're left 4.9 million who want to be part of South Africa to build the country. I think that's the thing that we need to focus our energies on. The second thing is I think it's important for us, for President Ramaphosa to lean into his business credentials, because Trump is a billionaire. He deals with billionaires. He's a very transactional person. He likes to deal with people of his equal stature. So in a way, without saying it, the president has to demonstrate he's a businessman, a deal maker like Trump, and meet him at that level. But having said all those, is while you're going to make a deal, it shouldn't be at the cost of our sovereignty or our dignity as a country. We shouldn't be mortgaging the country's future. And the important thing is we should be going there. And we should be going there, not on a mandate, but certainly representing the continent as well. Because now remember the challenge, remember all these tariffs and all those, as Sia says, they may affect South Africa, but not as much as they're going to affect the rest of the continent. So South Africa, it may be the least affected, but if South Africa goes there and in a way creates a quote-unquote impression that they are part of a bigger group. I don't think the US would want to damage the relationship with the rest of the continent,
Right.
because they depend on us for so much more other than just other. I mean, that's why. Yeah.
Yeah,
Let me
so
leave it there.
we have some leverage. I think that's the core. And this has
We
been
do
such
have
an
leverage.
insightful discussion. I hope that we're able to catch up as well, perhaps even after that meeting. Thank you so much to our panelists here. Biniza, Executive Director of Political Economy of Southern Africa, Mathatebe Kalafeng, founder of Brand Africa, and Tiens Elof of the Afrikaner Leadership Network. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We've got your headlines at the top of the hour. Stay with us.